Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
Hello, and welcome to Series 6, Episode 1 of Around the World Today
podcast brought to you by Real Terrio Radio.
I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to this news server, and if you've listened to the podcast before, on our old server, welcome to Podbean. A few changes, and we're going to go through them later on, so okay, let's start with the intro of this podcast. So, where are we going? What are we seeing? And what are we doing? It's been a year since our last episode, and basically this is because a lot has been going on in my life. A lot. So we found ourselves right now on an edge of a precipice of a fight between left and right in politics that are trying to divide us, and then we have centralists in the middle who are just throwing it all out. And this seems to happen around the Western world. We see the left blaming the right blaming the left, and then them all blaming the centre ground. It's quite funny, isn't it? Now, if you're a middle grounder and you don't go in for politics, you're just like, what the hell is going on? Right? Everyone is just blaming everyone. And I bet you're sitting there right now and you figure to yourself, well, Harry, it's been like this for about 40 years. Well, I can't really answer that because, like, for the first 20 years of I'm only 36. So, for the first 20 years, I was just trying to learn to be a human being. I learned to live life with a disability, dyspraxia. This has changed quite considerably of late as well. But what I can tell you from the past 10 years, or 13 years, shall we say, it seems to be that we as humans, as world citizens, as good citizens as well, have somehow forgot a few things. Like consequences of our actions and our decision making. Isn't that like, we make a decision, but we can't remember, or we choose not to remember that those decisions that we could make today will have ramifications, or could have ramifications even, tomorrow. Let's delve into this, shall we? So this weekend I was reading some of and even this morning, I was reading some of the news stories that are coming out around the world. Hence why this is called Around the World Today, because we are looking at stories around the world today. We're going to talk about them, we're going to dive into them, and you're going to hear my point of view. With some of the changes that are coming, I'm going to hear some of your points of view as well, hopefully. But today's been a very weird day because I've had to go for an eye test, a special kind of eye test somewhere. And for most of the morning, I was completely blind and blurry. So, yeah. Before I left the house to go to this place, I was watching the news. And I saw Liz Truss. Now, she goes down as the shortest premiership of the United Kingdom's history. 40 days, I believe it was. And I believe Lettuce outgrew her. Letty, as I call her, sent her a deputy to the Institute of Government today to give a speech. and the deputy's Liz Truss. But, you know, bear with me a sec. Bear with me, all right? That's all I'm asking. So, it's funny, I was reading. Now, Liz Truss, and as I was listening to it as well, she acknowledged that she tried to do things in a rush in her time in office. Well, 40 days. Well, you're going to have to do it in a rush, aren't you? But the Tory MP argued that she could not deliver her plans due to political and the economic establishment, blaming institutional bureaucracy. It's very easy to blame people who can't answer back, isn't it? Because the civil service can't answer back. They're not allowed to. They're impartial. Meanwhile, the people who actually take the decisions are the government ministers. She had been a government minister since 2010. Okay, so the former Prime Minister, if you can call her that for 40 days, called on Rishi Sunak to cut taxes, reduce benefits increases, and raise the retirement age, and delay net zero commitments. Isn't that good? The only thing with those decisions were that when she tried it a year ago, she sank the economy. Also, these decisions were taken by her party in the last 13 years. Now, is she trying to say, before we move into the rest of this episode, is she now trying to say that she didn't understand or she doesn't understand the ramifications of decisions as a government minister that she's taken? Because if she is, aren't we all screwed? Aren't we all heading for a place where decision making, we no longer think of the ramifications? Now, there were a series of economic measures that caused a lot of problems for homeowners, for people on benefits, cost of living crisis. And we're going to be talking about that later on in the second part of this podcast. The first part, we're going to be talking about decision making and how the decisions that we take today will have ramifications tomorrow. So, I'm now going to tell you how you can listen and how you can contact the show. After today's episode, we'll be taking call-ins on this show, and you'll be able to call in from your listening point. We ask that you do have a microphone and you have headphones when you're coming through, just so we don't have any static, basically. We're also able to take panel members, so we can have a wider conversation with other people, and we can talk about certain topics and stuff like this. We can and plan to also bring a few more topics to this podcast for our friends and our fans. We call you friends here. And we like to respect everyone's opinion, no matter if you disagree, in a world today. And these podcasts are recorded as well, so you can listen back on them. But for today, as it's the first one of the episode, we're not taking guests today. So I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back to summer 2019. It was a time before COVID. We hadn't even heard of the words stay at home and save lives. We had a Prime Minister named Theresa May. She stood outside of Downing Street and said goodbye and drove off in a car down the road to Westminster to become a backbench MP again. And we have driving in to Downing Street from Buckingham Palace, where he met the late Queen, Boris Johnson. And he becomes PM. We have Brexit. But we're not going to rehash that, are we? This, but to come on, is what were the Conservatives thinking about? This is the first decision that they took as a party that has the whole of the last 5 years. Now, the decision to make Boris Johnson Prime Minister, agree with it, disagree with it, as much as you want. But his premiership was riddled with scandal, uproar. We have a general election a couple of months later. Boris runs, and the Conservatives a majority. People still don't understand that you didn't vote for Boris Johnson to be your Prime Minister. You actually voted for the Conservative Party to be your government's party. Well, they understand it now. They just didn't at the time. However, they should have, because in 2017 they just elected Theresa May and the Conservative parties, and in 2015 they elected David Cameron and the Conservative Party again. So, they should understand that you're not voting for a person, you're voting for a political party. It's just that the person who's Prime Minister is the leader of the party. Now, members decided Boris Johnson was going to be their leader. Members decided that Liz Truss was going to be their leader. And again, members decided that Rishi Sunak was going to be their leader. The same with Theresa May. The problem you have is that surely when you've had 4 prime ministers since 2015, 5 if you count Cameron, and the electorate really hasn't had much of a say in this, on who's going to be Prime Minister. They've only had a say on who's going to be a local MP. And then that person goes back to Parliament, and the people with the most become the ruling party. That's democracy in the United Kingdom at work. Now, like I said, we're not going to rehash any of this and stuff. But those decisions that those members took, it led to £265,000 being spent on the defence of a former Prime Minister who chose and made a decision to lie to Parliament. This money has been taken away from your children, your children's children, even our parents, and our NHS. The same Prime Minister that or ex-Prime Minister that we're talking about also decided and made decisions that we were going to cap for the NHS. Well, to me, was a bit of a gaslighting, because at the same time, the same political party, 3 years on, when doctors and nurses are out on strike because they can't afford to live on the money that we pay them. Remember, £265,000 for his legal defence. Because of a political party's unwillingness to raise wages, to put proper financial constraints in place for the NHS. We jump now to 2022, and Boris seems to me that it really does seem to me that all Conservative MPs do not understand, or all Conservative Prime Ministers do, and that's what they do. They stand outside number 10 Downing Street, they say goodbye, and they go off into the sunset. But the decisions that they've taken have ramifications for me and you, my friend. during these things. Our pensions, benefits, treatment at your local NHS hospital. If our local fire station is still going to be open. If our police are going to be on the streets. And, it's quite bad to me, again, that all Conservative Prime Ministers do is stand outside Downing Street and leave. And when Boris did this in last year, we got Liz Truss. And have you heard her talk about pork balls? Or chicken? Or even the crazy Liberal Democrat speech she did in the 80s or early 90s? But again, she chose last year to sink the economy over her perverse economic plan and lack of understanding. See, we forget, as humans, it is very easy to do that a decision that we take today will affect something tomorrow. Let us dive into this across the pond. So in America in 2020, in November, Donald Trump lost an election, but took the decision, as what's come out in a Meet the Press interview this week, from his own lips. He took the decision not to listen to his officials or his appointed lawyers who were appointed by him for his counsel, to give him counsel on stuff like this. We then jump from November 2020 to January 6, 2021. We're standing and we're watching outside the White House. We're there. Donald Trump is giving a speech. He's urging people to walk down the Capitol, down the mall to the Capitol building, to go and run rampage. Now, his supporters that he helped galvanize and start, surely they knew that this was from me as a British point of view, to me, this was a half-assed attempt of causing chaos. Do you remember where you were when you first heard about the Capitol building? America's equivalent to our Parliament in the UK was attacked. I was sitting where I'm sitting right now, writing a podcast quite conveniently and watching it unfold. These people who chose to turn up in Washington, D.C., who are now facing at least 100 years, in some cases 50 years, 20 years, very long sentences for invading their legislator while in session. Remember that a legislature or a parliament is an institution of governance. You elect your representatives to go there. You don't turn up at Parliament and become a representative. You elect a representative to represent your views as the general populace. So, this is a consequence of poor decision making. Those people chose to listen to Donald Trump, who took the decision that he wasn't going to listen to people whose job it was to monitor elections. He thought he knew better. Meanwhile, 3-4 months on, it's causing a riot. Now, we're not going to go into the case and stuff because it is a legal case. We will go into it a little bit more. But again, this is a poor sign of decision making from Donald Trump, from his supporters who chose to follow him. He made the decision. They said, how high? Would you jump off a mountain if Donald Trump told you, or would you ask him how high? The same with Boris, the same with Liz Truss. They have made decisions that have affected our lives here in the UK or in the USA And you've got other politicians around the world, such as in Australia, in Spain, you've got Carles Puigdemont with his independence. You've now seen it with Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, who has now resigned as well. People have made decisions in their political careers and they don't understand the ramifications. So, Liz Truss talked about decreased productivity. Did you know that poor decision making can lead to an inefficient allocation of resources? What leads to reduced efficiency and productivity? And a decreased morale. If employers perceive that their managers' decisions are unfair or incorrect, it can devise or get rid of confidence and job satisfaction. Here in Wales, a recent decision that was taken by politicians in the Welsh Parliament or Senate currently was taken before the last election, brought in by a Conservative minister, shadow minister, I believe, about speed limits while driving. We're not rehashing this argument either. We're not rehashing any of these arguments. We're just talking about them. But here in Wales, they've just brought in that you can only now drive 20 miles an hour in certain areas. The Conservative Party now opposed this, even though it was one of their own members who brought it in and they voted for it. So did Labour and so did Plaid Cymru. And I believe there are only a few handful of MSs individually who did not vote for it. But surely in 2018, that if they didn't agree with the decision that they took today, surely they understand that they took that decision in 2018 and they made the case for it. So what's changed? Because not much has changed, really. Now, jump to a few weeks ago when the legislation was being brought through. The Welsh Conservatives did a flip-flopping, acting like they were so stupid that we can't go back and look how they voted as members, but we actually can, and we actually can see this. We actually can see that, it was a Conservative member's bill that was brought through. Are they just flip-flopping for the sake of it? Are they just going after the popular stuff? Now, this is a bigger thing because in education, people aren't taught to read political manifestos. We're very rarely taught about politics in our education system in the United Kingdom. What's really, really bad, if you ask me. But it also seems to be that today we're not actually teaching people about decision making and how decisions have ramifications. What is a bit of a... Surely that's what we should be teaching, right? Is that if we make a decision today, that decision has a consequence, and that consequence can lead to bigger problems for us. Now, I have an analogy, and it's an old analogy here, right? So, as kids, whose parents have said to them that basically, you want to go and have snacks, you ask for a snack, like a cake, but it's an hour or an hour and a half until your dinner. And your mum, or your dad, or your nana, or your bamper, or your mangi, your nangi, or your bamki, or anyone like this, grandparents, parents, anyone who's in authority over you, right? They turn around to you and say, okay, here's a piece of cake. And then you don't eat your dinner in an hour's time because you've had that piece of cake. They've made a decision to give you the piece of cake, to give into your, to you, to give you that food, but you leave your dinner. Now, you didn't make that decision. Your parents made that decision for you, those adults. They made the decision to give you it. So it was their decision that you're going to waste your food, because we all know full well that, you're probably going to become full And you're probably not going to want that salad, are you? Because you've just had a piece of chocolate cake. So people don't understand. So then you're wasting food, right? And you're throwing food away. Now, we're not talking about food, and we're not going to do a cooking show, even though I would have so much fun doing that. Maybe in a couple of weeks. But you're not going to eat your food. You're not going to, your mum's probably spent, or your dad, or whoever cooks your meals, probably spent hours making this food or something, because I know I'm about to make a curry after this episode, and I'm going to spend an hour doing it. And I'm the only one who's going to eat it. So if I don't eat it, it's going in the freezer. But that's besides the point. You can't do that with a roast dinner, can you? Well, you could keep it for tomorrow and just give the child it again. But, are they going to eat it? But again, it's your decision. You've just made that decision, but you didn't understand that giving your child that piece of cake is going to hamper the decision that you took before as well. So sometimes decisions that you take can also make a course correction of poor decision making. But this didn't happen in this case with Liz Truss, because we had just come out of 2 or maybe 3 years of chaos. I somehow feel, so here again in Wales, we're looking, in 1998, we had devolution. But in 2022, those who voted for devolution, or the vast majority, somehow feel, we've had a few votes on this since 1998. We had a vote in 2011, actually, to give the Welsh Assembly, as it was, more power. People voted for this, the majority won. Again, like Brexit, in a referendum, a majority won. But the people who take these decisions don't understand the ramifications of these decisions. Because in 2023, and even in 2022, because we had elections in 2022, and in the party manifestos of all major political parties who won the so Labour and Plaid Cymru, who are in a confidence and supply vote, in their manifestos was to increase the power of the Senate. But the only problem is the Conservatives, again, in their poor decision making of their marketing, have somehow twisted it to be a left-right divide. What if I was to tell you that the Senate Commission was headed by their version of the Speaker, the Llywydd? What if I was to tell you that the committee behind that have representatives from all political parties, and a report was commissioned by that committee and accepted that we require more politicians within the Senate? Doesn't that undo democracy from a decision from the leader of the Conservative Party here in Wales, Andrew R.T. Davies, and his populism and his untruths? Because it tells a story of a divide. It was his decision to tell a few porcupines, as I would call them. It's his decision to divide left from right. And it's his decision, just like it was Boris Johnson's, just like it was Liz Truss, just like it was Donald Trump's, to divide families, friends, people, and the country. Divide and conquer, my friend. Divide and conquer. However, the bit that these people, what these parties are promising are that basically will take the decisions for you, but we don't understand the decisions that we're taking. See, the bit that Liz Truss forgets, Boris Johnson forgets, Rishi Sunak even, Andrew R.T. Davis, is that within the United Kingdom, the Conservative Party have been in power for 13 years. That's over a decade of decisions taken by government ministers. Now, it was Liz Truss's decision to wreck the economy, to take a sledgehammer to the UK economy last year after it was so fragile and trying to recover. In event of low productivity. How did we end up at low productivity? You can't really blame the last Labour government that left in 2010, because right now we're in 2023 and last year we were in 2022. There had been 12 years of a Conservative government making the decisions. Her own political party. She was a government minister. There are decisions that she took on trade, on law, on taxation, because she was First Minister of the Exchequer. Now, she tries to blame the left for her very bad decision making, and the centrists, because she's all of a sudden become all right wing. The only problem is, though, the same people who were taking the decisions before she entered office have been making those decisions for 13 years. If you want to blame someone for your low productivity, for your financial markets crashing, for homeowners now having to pay extra on their mortgages, look no further than the person who took the decision but didn't understand the ramifications of their decision. Now, I could promise you the world. I could make that decision. Do you know what I mean? I could say to you right now, I'm going to give you so much money and you're going to, you're going to win and you're going to love it. But does this mean that that decision is the right decision? I haven't thought about, that I might not have that money. I haven't thought about that I might not be able to do what I said I could do. We are living in a time right now where it seems to me that the world has gone totally crazy when it comes to making or being able to make decisions for ourselves. We seem to be at that place where education is very important. We should be teaching our children about politics. We should also be teaching our children about the ramifications of making decisions. And I'm not saying that not every parent does this, but the vast majority of late, it seems to be, doesn't. But it also seems to be that the older generations don't understand the decisions that they make have ramifications on themselves too. It is like that poor decision making has turned into a TV show where we are now have Poundland politicians that can't think for themselves, that have to go with major public opinion. So take Brexit, 52-48. That wasn't, they went with a 52 rather than trying to find consensus in the middle. There's always somewhere better in the middle ground, I feel. And I'm not saying this because I'm a Christian. And I do like the middle ground, and I do believe that Christ was the all-time middle-grounded person. But again, you cannot govern a country on public opinion. Sometimes you need someone who is going to take tough decisions. You need someone who understands that the decision that you're going to take may have ramifications. Do you really think that Liz Truss understood that the decision that she took to sink the economy in her Poundland government, as I call it, would make a run for mortgages, put more people in debt, and, see where we are? Isn't it just like that after 13 years of the economy, I just want to shout at the TV screen, I just want to say to all parties, right, left, or centrist, where have you been? Have you been under a stone for the last 13 years? To me, these bad decisions, these Poundland politicians who follow populism rather than taking decisions. Look at back to 2020. It took the government 2 weeks from when they were told to lock down to actually lock down, because public opinion didn't want lockdowns. Sorry, but to me, this makes a total mockery of British politics. It makes a mockery of democracy. And at this world, and on the world stage, it is totally shameful. It's up to you. How are you going to make your decisions in life? Do you understand that when you make a decision, this has a ramification? This decision that you could take today, say you go to the bank, you have £20 in your bank account, you take £10 out. But tomorrow, you know that you're going somewhere that you require that £20, but you've spent 10 of it today. You've made a decision. You've got to live with that decision. You knew the ramifications, that you couldn't go to that event tomorrow because you don't have enough money anymore because you've spent it today. It's life. People don't understand or read party manifestos in election time. Read the manifesto, you now know what the party's going to do. Come and vote, right? And when you're making your decision, because you've read the information, you understand what's going to happen. Back to the Senate here in Wales, and even to Boris Johnson and stuff like this. Do you really think, people voted the way they did because they were told lies? But if they had read the manifestos, you would see that there was very little in the manifesto in 2019 for the Conservative Party when it came to deciding stuff. Because look at it right now. Try and blame the COVID-19, but you can't blame it. Because, again, people have been making decisions but haven't understood what they were deciding on. I think I'll leave that right there. And we're going to talk now, just after this.
Welcome, everybody, to this week.
Hello and welcome back. So, yeah, we are now going to move on to another topic. So, we just talked about decision making. And actually, the two topics are intertwined. So, I was reading an article this weekend about supermarket owners complaining about the rise of shoplifting in the UK. It's all well and good, right? I hear you saying, but Terry, there's a cost of living crisis. Yeah, I know. There is a cost of living crisis, right? The funniest bit about this is that they chose, these supermarkets, to come out last week and say, basically, cost of living crisis, shoplifters is an epidemic. But when wages in the United Kingdom haven't risen in line with inflation for quite some time, where do you have high job losses, redundancies like Wilkinson, companies going under? People on benefits unable to live because the money isn't good enough. Well, I know it's benefits, but sometimes the money doesn't last. I gave an analogy in the last section about that 20 quid. Sometimes that's all people have got. And they do have to make a decision that affects either going out with friends, socialising, or putting food on the table. Or even the decision to go to a food bank. But what the supermarkets fail to understand, at the same time of a cost of living crisis, their commercial teams have taken a decision to increase the prices. Yes, I understand that a business has to make a profit to be able to sustain it. Well, not every business does, actually, because you can have a non-profit business. And quite frankly, when you've got supermarkets like Tesco, Sainsbury's complaining of shoplifting and they've just risen their prices, have you seen the price of bread these days? Have you... I was looking on Instagram this morning and I saw some statistics from the National Union of Students here in Wales, or NUS actually. And it was quite funny because I actually got this right. Did you know that a sausage roll from Greggs cost 45p in 2004? But in 23, it cost £1.20. Now that's a nice rise, right? Did you know that a Big Mac in 2004 cost £1.88? In 2023, it costs £3.49. All right, petrol was 80p per litre in 2004. In 2023, petrol costs £1.49. In 2004, Freddy bar cost about 10p, wasn't it? Now it's about 50p. Now they were just a few decisions that were taken on prices and a few prices. But when you look at bread, when you look at the cost of the rising costs of flour and the rising cost of prices, even stuff that, are made in-house, they've risen. These are then passed on to the customer. The customer can no longer afford it because the customer is you and me. Well, we're trying to work. We're trying to sustain our lives. We're trying to feed our family, to put food on the table. But then we have our customer. We have supermarkets. And sometimes you can't afford it because it's a choice between putting food on the table or putting electricity in the box. And to be able to put food on the table, in some instances, because you need to be able to cook, you need electricity in the box. So one month you could afford to light your house, from one pay, and then on the other month you could afford to feed it. What do you expect? These supermarkets didn't understand that when they were raising prices of normal household items and playing little games with sales and stuff like this, instead, of helping people, what they didn't understand is, of course there was going to be an increase of shoplifting. Because of the decision that their boards, their commercial teams have taken and have come to. It's not only politics where people are making bad decisions and not understanding the ramifications of their decisions. It happens in every walk of life. We see them do this across the board. We see people making a decision, carrying through with that decision, and then when it all mucks up, they blame everyone else besides the person who made the actual decision. And I think that's where we're going to leave it today. I hope you've enjoyed this live episode. But again, when you are making a decision, please, people, have some thought. If you are making a decision about other people, have some thought about the people you're going to be making decisions about. Contemplate, think, come to a consensus if you're unable to think about it. Again, these institutions that I've mentioned, these people that I've mentioned, the stories, are the fact that basically poor decision making can lead us into being more poor in one instance, or even lead us to be less equipped to deal with a situation. So, yes.
Around the World Today podcast brought to you by Real Terrio Radio.
I ask you that when you're making your decisions tonight, to just think about it. Even if it's a little decision, like what am I going to have to eat? Think about that decision. You may be hungry in a couple of hours because you didn't eat the proper thing. Remember to be yourself as well when you're making these decisions. Don't let anyone else try and tell you different. Do you know what I mean? If you want to go with it, go with it. But you just have to understand that that decision that you're making has a consequence. Consequences of our actions. Rather than, blame someone else for it. So, as I've said, we have changed up this podcast. You've been listening to Around the World Today, Series 6, Episode 1. Come on, join me on Wednesday at 5 p.m. for Episode 2 of this series. We are going to be talking about bookies and gambling on that episode. After a year's experiment of me and the other Terry. And it's quite interesting. I don't know if we're going to be doing it on that episode or on Fridays, but it is coming up. It is one of the topics. For our guest sections, after this week, we are going to be opening up our phone lines, so you can come and listen live. All of these episodes are going to be recorded live until the end of the year, and we've also got some topics that are going to come up on a Wednesday. We've got a great plan for this, and we're looking forward for you coming on this journey with us of live podcasting now. This is the 6th series. Remember, you can listen to our old episodes on our website, and you can get there via realterrio.com. Click on Radio Around the World, and it'll take you to the website for Around the World Today. If you want to contact me, you can do this via email, a few ways actually. Via email, it's terryd@realterrio.com, or you can send me a Facebook message. Someone will email, or you can send the studio info@realterrio.com a email. I will get them, or in the chat box when we're live. Otherwise, send us a tweet at RealTario on X. We're on Instagram again at RealTario, and we're also on LinkedIn. If you have any ideas for topics, you can email them us through the contacts that I've just gone through. We'd like you to stay in tune, and as we've said in this, we're in a world where events are unfolding rapidly, and our interconnectedness has never been more apparent. It is crucial to understand what is happening beyond our own borders, walls, and so on. That's where we step in here Around the World Today. Every week we're going to look into this, we're going to dive into these, and we're going to see from diverse world of news and politics and uncover stories that matter the most. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope this finds you safe, and I hope you are all well. Have a lovely evening, and I'll see you Wednesday. Bye-bye.
This is the world we live in. This is the world we call our own. This is the time, and times are changing. This is the world we call our home. Feel the freedom. There's no limit to what we can do. Feel the freedom to fly.
Around the World Today podcast brought to you by Real Terrio Radio.